Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Hey there, it's Molly, and welcome back to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. This week, if you are listening to this in real time, it's dropping on Thursday, March 19th. We celebrated St. Patrick's Day, which means we've all been surrounded by talk of luck, lucky charms, lucky breaks, luck of the Irish. And it made me curious. What do we actually mean when we say something is luck? Because if you start listening carefully, you'll notice how often we use that word. She's just lucky. I have terrible luck. That was pure luck. I never get lucky with that. We say it casually, almost reflexively, as if that single word explains everything. But today I want to slow that down, look at what's happening in the brain when we attribute something to luck. Because from a neuroscience and psychology perspective, luck is often less about magic and more about mindset, attention, and pattern recognition. I have said it at least, feels like 100 times here on Think Thursdays that your brain is a efficiency machine. It's a prediction machine. It's an efficiency machine. It is constantly trying to reduce uncertainty, conserve energy, and make sense of a world that is far more complex than you could ever consciously process. One of the fastest ways to do that is to simplify. And luck is a beautifully efficient explanation. If something works out, we can say it was luck. If something doesn't work out, we can say it was bad luck. That one word wraps dozens of variables, timing, preparation, emotional state, environment, repetition, skill level, into one tidy conclusion. And let's face it, the brain likes tidy. It likes closure. It likes to feel like the loop has been completed. But here's the trade-off. When we default to luck, we often skip over patterns. And your brain is fundamentally wired to learn through pattern detection. Neurons that fire together wire together. Repeated behaviors create predictable outcomes, and small inputs accumulate over time. Learning requires noticing those links. Luck short circuits the noticing. So there's a fascinating body of research by psychologist Dr. Richard Wiseman, who spent years studying people who described themselves as either lucky or unlucky. And he ran a series of experiments to understand what separated the two groups. In one study, participants were handed a newspaper and asked to count the number of photographs inside. Straightforward task, right? What they didn't know was that halfway through the paper, in large, bold print, there was a message that said, "Stop counting. There are 43 photographs in this newspaper." The people who identified as lucky tended to notice the message almost immediately. The people who identified as unlucky often missed it entirely and continued counting. The difference wasn't intelligence, it wasn't effort, it was attentional style. Those who described themselves as lucky were generally more relaxed and open. Their attention was broader. They scanned the environment more flexibly. Those who described themselves as unlucky were often more anxious and narrowly focused. Their attention was constrained. They were locked onto the task and less likely to notice unexpected information. What looks like luck in this case was actually cognitive flexibility. Wiseman found that people who experience themselves as lucky tend to notice chance opportunities, expect positive outcomes, stay open to new experiences, and reinterpret setbacks in constructive ways. None of those traits are mystical. They are cognitive and behavioral tendencies, which means they are trainable. Let's take a deeper look into neuroscience. There's a network in your brainstem called the Reticular Activating System, or RAS. And I've mentioned it before on Think Thursday, but heck, it was so many episodes ago, I don't even remember which one it was. But the RAS is, if you look at it or think of it this way, it would be like your brain's filtering system. At any given moment, your nervous system is taking in an overwhelming amount of sensory input. Sounds, movement, internal sensations, facial expressions, memories, thoughts. If you consciously processed all of it, you would be flooded. Bottom line is you can't. Your brain cannot. And so the RAS, the Reticular Activating System, filters. It decides what gets flagged as important and what fades into the background. And what determines what gets flagged? Your beliefs, your goals, your fears, your repeated thoughts, your emotional priorities. The RAS works closely with higher brain regions like the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. When something aligns with what you already believe or care about, it gets amplified. If you've ever decided you wanted to buy a certain type of car and suddenly you see that car everywhere, that is your RAS at work. The cars were always there. Your brain simply began highlighting them. Now apply that to your identity. If you hold the belief, I'm unlucky, your RAS will prioritize evidence that supports that belief. You'll notice the missed opportunities, the rejection, the one awkward comment, the setback. And you may overlook the neutral outcomes, the steady progress, the small wins, the opportunity that did appear. Not because you're negative, but because your brain is built to maintain coherence. The RAS is not scanning for objective truth. It is scanning for confirmation. And over time, that confirmation loop strengthens the belief. Belief shapes attention. Attention shapes perception. Perceptions shape behavior. And behavior shapes outcome. And the outcomes, of course, reinforce the belief from the beginning. So that's not luck. That is neural patterning. Layered on top of this is something called attribution bias. We naturally explain outcomes in ways that protect our identity. When something goes well, we tend to credit effort or ability. And when something goes poorly, we're more likely to attribute it to external factors, circumstances like timing or luck. Again, randomness absolutely exists. Life is not fully controllable, obviously. But if we over-attribute outcomes to luck, we quietly remove our role in the equation. And when we remove our role, we remove our leverage. If something is random, there's nothing to adjust. If it's patterned, there's room to experiment. And growth lives in the experiment, right? What we often call luck is actually probability becoming visible. Probability increases with preparation, repetition, exposure, skill development, emotional regulation, and consistency. Think about someone who appears lucky in their career or relationships or their health. Often what we're seeing is accumulated probability. Years of quiet practice, repeated attempts, learning from setbacks, and staying regulated enough to notice opportunity. We see the visible outcome. We don't see the invisible inputs. So we label it luck. But probability can be influenced. Magic cannot. And that distinction matters. Here's the shift I want you to consider this week. Where in your life are you using the word luck? What if instead of asking, Why am I so unlucky? You asked. What patterns are here? What am I consistently practicing? What is my attention trained to notice? Where could I widen my focus? This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because when you move from luck to patterns, you move from passive observer to active participant. You don't control everything, but you can influence far more than you think. And sometimes the difference between lucky and unlucky is simply this. One person is scanning for possibility. The other is scanning for confirmation. Your brain will support whichever one you train it to do. So let's try to train it to scan and look for possibility. That's how you become more lucky. Until next time, my friends, choose peace, and I will see you on Monday.